Evening. This is the Town of Littleton Board of Health meeting for Wednesday, April 26, 2023. It is 7:05. We had a 7 p.m. Public hearing with our ID decision support tool. Mr. Wason is not available. He is under the weather tonight. But at 7:05, so we'll skip directly to our public hearing for 6 Spectacle Pond Road with Seth Donahoe of Dillis and Roy Civil Design Group. We'll discuss a variance request for construction of a new sewage disposal system and well. However, we've been discussing this for a couple months now, and I think we received a letter from Mr. Donahoe in our packet regarding the board asking for the board's support of the use of emergency access to the water service across the street, and he's wondering whether or not the board will support that. And I think that he'd addressed our previous concerns of moving some of those leach fields. Jim, have you seen those updated plans? He was going to, I think, move a section or move some of the paved area. What had happened to that plan?
Just looking at it, it's been a while since I've opened it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to share the screen if
Sure, Seth. Yeah. Go ahead. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is before you is the revised plan, and just quickly for the record, this is Seth Donahoe with Dillis and Roy Civil Design Group. We have been discussing for the past couple months the proposed development at 6 Spectacle Pond Road. As the board is aware, this was subject to a special permit and site plan from the planning board. And at the last meeting, the board was kind enough to grant us relief from Regulation 10 to allow us to get our proposed sewage flow in line with what the planning board allowed for the site. In doing that, the board had a couple questions for us, kind of some odds and ends. And that was if we could relocate the trenches so that they are not under the pavement. We previously had a portion of 2 of the trenches underneath the pavement. So we reconfigured the primary leaching area, which you're looking at with the yellow lines on your plan. And that's now entirely outside of the pavement. There was another question that we needed to specify the water and force main crossing should the site ever receive a connection to the municipal water in Spectacle Pond Road. It's proposed to come down the front of the axis of the site and then into the building. And at this point right here, there's a crossing of the force main. So on the second sheet of that, we have a standard detail that's used in many communities for when these utilities do cross. We added that to the plan. So those are the technical changes to the plan. And as the chairman mentioned, we also submitted a letter. The board was kind enough to provide us some data about some of the monitoring wells on the abutting landfill site. And we heard the board's concerns related to contaminants in those wells. We did discuss that ultimately it is our goal to connect to municipal water, but we are unable to do that because there's a 5-year moratorium on Spectacle Pond Road. I believe Spectacle Pond Road was paved last year, 2022. So we have a few years to wait before we can access the utility there. And that is why we have a temporary private well proposed for this site. I did receive an email from the DPW today. They are not of the opinion that this would allow us emergency access to the utilities. The subject being the potential contaminants in the groundwater. We would not be able to access the utility within Spectacle Pond Road. So that's primarily what I hope to discuss with the board tonight. As I know the board would prefer that we connect to municipal water, it does not seem to be plausible at this time based on the DPW's opinion. So I can certainly keep this plan up, or I can take it down if the board would like to discuss the remaining issues related to the project.
I think the main issue we're dealing with right now is the one of potable water and the unavailability of it by means of a temporary well at the site. Are there any other aspects of this plan that we haven't already talked about and you've already gone ahead and changed?
No, there's not. At this point, there is not. So our original point for coming before you was the relief for Regulation 10, which we have worked through together.
Mhm.
The only thing is of the opinion of, or the potential for a private well on the site, potentially having contaminants in it and health risk associated with that.
Right. So let's just fast forward a bit. Let's say you spend, $10,000 or $15,000 and go and you drill the well and you test it, come to find out it's not potable and it's contaminated. Then we're back right here where we are right now, asking the board for its opinion on whether or not you should have access to an emergency water source.
That is correct.
Okay. Understood.
And the long-term goal is absolutely to connect the site to the municipal water source.
Right.
The well is only to appease the moratorium.
Mhm.
From the applicant's view, obviously, they don't want to spend the money to drill a well to find out what in some minds is the inevitable at this point. So my letter to the board was essentially requesting support for emergency access to the utility. And it seems like we're at a bit of stalemate right there.
This might be a silly question. Is there a way to bore under the road so you don't have to cut it so you can have access to that water supply?
Yeah, so we could certainly, there's a couple ways to skin the cat.
I see why they don't want you to cut it. I get it. I understand.
So ultimately, the service is underneath the pavement as far as the maps that I've seen for it. It would certainly be potential. We could open a small point to access that service and then directionally drill. It's very sandy material at the site that would not preclude that option. So it would be feasible to get the water line itself there without ripping up a typical trench section.
Yeah, and it's not my purview. I'm just asking because I don't know the technology and how it all happens.
No, and truthfully, in surrounding towns, actually, this very applicant, I worked with him on a project in Acton. The road was paved right before they started construction, and the town felt they could not prohibit access to the utility. Instead, we had to do an increased patch width, increased specifications. So instead of just doing a trench, we ended up going from edge of pavement to edge of pavement for an extra width on either side. And that was a reasonable solution there. But I don't discount the DPW's experience or their opinions in this either. So.
Oh, yeah, I don't either. Jim, just really quick, what is your impression of, and you can give a best guess based on your crystal ball, if they went and drilled a temporary well, would the water be potable?
So I guess you never know until you put the hole in the ground, because you never know what level of bedrock that you're going to pull the water from. But again, my recommendation would be is that they do the battery testing of, and particularly include those things that have been found around the landfill. If those things are found, unfortunately, it's an expensive process, but they'd put treatment in to remove the constituents that were in the water to make it potable. That might be one way to proceed with that, so that they would have potable water at the facility. Again, with the idea that once town water is available, they, decommission that well and go to the municipal water.
Okay.
If I may, that is a viable option. The concern in that is that we have a few year window where we're relying on a treatment system in a building that's potentially going to be occupied. And the issue would be if the treatment system cannot keep up or there's an issue with it, we're right back at square one here again too, just waiting for the appropriate long-term solution.
So we'll go over. Thanks, Matt Wason, for joining us. I know you're not feeling too hot, but we'll go around the board here and ask some questions. Dan Kane, any questions or comments?
I don't have any questions about the changes to the septic system. I think you've taken our comments and questions, appropriately and addressed them. As far as the well issue, I'm feeling your pain. I do have a question. Certainly, I've done some quick research on the well requirements and setbacks. I know we've seen a 400-foot distance someplace in the past as we've started talking about this well from a landfill. I admit, as I'm looking through the state regs, I'm not seeing it, but I may have just missed that one because it's a very well within some distance from a landfill is an odd is an oddity as opposed to a standard setback from a floodplain or from roadways or those kind of things. If we're looking at the requirement of a 400-foot setback from landfill, it looks like it's hard to say, probably 175 feet from the property line, and that shared property line is the existing landfill. So the landfill cap would have to be set very far into the landfill property, I think, to hit that 400 mark, which means you're within that 400 feet mark. So the part of this is this a bit moot. We've got test wells that are positive. We don't know what you're going to find in your proposed well, but it sounds like, again, I have to find the chapter and verse for the setback from a landfill, but we're well within that 400-foot limit, if that is in fact the limit. Perhaps someone else has a better answer or has that one for me, but that certainly is, I think, my biggest concern is that I hear you that putting a well in is expensive and it comes up positive. Now you've got well cost plus treatment cost for a relatively short term. We certainly can't order DPW to allow you access, particularly for new construction. This isn't an existing structure where, you've been living there and now your family's on the street because you no longer have access to your well water and you need to get into the street to get access. This is new construction for a property. I don't know how long it's been owned, but it certainly has been open space, construction storage kind of space for, as long as I've been in town. I'm torn between being able to say, this is a critical one for us. I mean, if this is a proposal you want to move forward on and before 4.5 years is up, because we're probably a couple months into our 5-year moratorium on Spec Pond. I'm not sure. I think you're at a business decision now rather than a board of health decision. I think the location of that well is my only other concern is the setback adequate from the landfill. I'm not sure if Jim or one of the engineers has chapter and section for that one.
Well, I'd be happy to address that if I may.
Sure.
So that the local well regulations require a 400-foot distance, and that's to an active or closed landfill. Now, the proposed well, just in round numbers, it's actually about the property line is angular. As you go further back from Spectacle Pond Road, we get increased distance. It's about 250 feet, 220 to 260 feet, depending on where you measure to on that property line. The interesting thing on this is that there's actually a wetland system at the back of our site, and that continues on to the former dump site and continues into a portion of the dump site too. So I recognize that the dump has been capped. It seems rather nebulous where the actual limits of the former dump were, but it would be reasonable to preclude that the dump was actually not in the wetlands. Otherwise, they would have had to do mitigation and cleanup work related to that. So there's actually quite a bit buffer between the proposed well and the dump area. Now, can we say definitively is that 400 feet? No, I don't think anybody can. The issue is that it's something that was there. It's been buried at some point. By all means, if the town has a copy of the plan showing the limits of the former landfill, we can certainly overlay that and tell you where it is. And I'm fairly certain we could, within reasonable changes, if that were to come, the former landfill were to come very close to the lot line, we could actually position this well and our infrastructure on the site so that we would meet that 400-foot setback. But I don't think that's you have a valid concern in there. The bigger issue here is that are we going to go move forward with putting a well in versus the proposed water connection?
Have you looked at all to see if the town has the final closure plans for the landfill?
I did. So I looked through some of the reports. I did not. What I also looked for is a wetland filing. I figured if there was cleanup in the wetland portion, there would have been a DEP file number under the Wetlands and Waterways Division associated with that. I didn't see that. I can certainly check on that and get back to the board. There is a DEP file number for the closure of the landfill itself under a separate department related to the long-term closure of that.
Nope, just around that 400, certainly from an engineering perspective, knowing that that's a 400-foot setback, due diligence would say that you've identified where that barrier, where that line is, so that you're in compliance or as close to compliance, or can justify that you're in compliance or not. So I think we're back to where we started. Of my question seems more of a business decision rather than a Board of Health piece, as far as well versus questions at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Kevin Davis.
See how long the camera lasts. Has been flicking on and off. Okay. I agree with all of Dan's points. I was the person that dug up the information on the monitoring well. If you go to the site, if you go to the second site locus map, where it kind of has it in the bottom corner, the test well that we're talking about would off the property in that front northeast corner of the adjacent property for Littleton. So that's where the monitoring well is. That's the well closest to the property line for this place. And that's, basically there's, the report has all the data and things like that in there. I am torn about supporting that because, again, I agree it's kind of a business decision. But if you went and dug it, you would certainly be right back here if you found all that loveliness that's from the well in there. If you have to do the 400 foot, I'm guessing you'll probably have to rearrange the stormwater infiltration area a little bit and move the well in that direction, because we can't have it close to the leaching field. So I'm guessing that would have to kind of get moved around a little bit. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not an engineer. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. Matt Wason.
Apologies for being late. Just to refresh, we already approved the septic design at the last meeting, correct? So we're just talking about the well?
Correct. We approved the septic design with the revisions.
Yeah. Okay. I guess on the well, if we don't know it's 400 feet away, but it could be 400 feet away, I feel like we're at an impasse until somebody goes and looks at the drawings and says within 400 feet or it's not within 400 feet.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
don't feel like I would even want to discuss it further until I know whether that's a yes or a no.
Okay. Thank you. Jim, any further comments before there's maybe a motion?
No, so that's, Seth mentioned it's your local well regulations that stipulate the 400 feet. And my rough guess based on the plan was the back property line from the proposed well was about 240 feet. Don't know where the toe of the landfill ends. As I've driven by, you can kind of see it sloping off towards the property line, but does that give you another 50 feet, another 100 feet? I don't know. I guess the other thing I would say about the wells around the landfill, they're likely to be shallow wells that are monitoring the groundwater, so the water just below the ground as opposed to water in the bedrock. I suspect they'll be drilling a well. So how much difference there'll be in the water quality, don't know.
Okay.
But be a difference.
All right. So Seth, it sounds to me like we're not quite ready to approach DPW as a board and say that you're in need of emergency water access until we know exactly where this well is going to be and what is going to come out of this well.
Yeah, so I hear that the points are valid. We have a little homework to go through the town records to see if there's something that shows exactly where that landfill was on the adjacent property.
Okay.
And then we'll make sure that we can meet that setback.
Okay.
I think if it seems to me, it's clear that the well is kind of the hands tied solution at this time. So as long as we can meet all the local setbacks, we will update our plan and forward that to your agent.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, so perhaps we'll be talking in the future. And have a pleasant evening.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing for 7:05, discussing Spectral Pond Road.
Second.
Motion is second, roll call vote. Kevin Davis,
Yes.
Dan Kane,
And Kane, yes.
and Matt Wason,
That way, and yes.
and Kevin Baker votes yes. Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. We have a 7:15 public hearing for 107 Mattawanakie Road, featuring Ted Doucette from Doucette Engineering to discuss a variance request for a sewage disposal system upgrade. upgrade design? It says upgrade design on the agenda, but it's a new construction design. Ted, if you can hear me, please state your name and address for the record.
Yep. Ted Doucette, Doucette Engineering.
Hi.
Peter's on here too. Peter Scott.
Okay.
He'd like to probably be able to talk.
Okay, let's promote Mr. Scott. All right, Ted, do you want to just give the board an overview and tell us where we are right now? Because I know we've been continued. We did have an opinion from town council, and we'll go through all that, but I'll let you kick it off.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the only thing we have left is that the town council opinion on the well. Jim can confirm or deny after I finish here. But I think the last thing that we had was that issue. We cleared up everything else, and at the last meeting, that was the last item we were discussing. And at that point, Kevin Baker, as chair, you said let's hold off. You continued the hearing, and for two hearings, so like 4 weeks or so, in order to get the opinion from town. And that's what we're here to discuss or to hear the results.
Okay, great. Dan, did everybody get a copy of this? Ted, I know you discussed it with town council, Ted.
Me? I haven't talked to town council.
You haven't talked to Tom? Okay.
No.
All right. And Dan, Matt, and Kevin, did you all get a copy of the? You did. Okay, great. So I'm going to go through, and I'm not sure if, I don't think this made it in the packet. I'm not sure if it did or not. It did make it in the packet. Great. So it's in the record. I will go ahead and read through this opinion here for everybody. Dear Chair Baker, you asked whether a claim that an applicant is denied substantially all beneficial use of a property somehow compels a local approving authority to grant a variance pursuant to 310 CMR 15.410(2) of the Title V regulations. Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection Regulations 310 CMR 15, more commonly known as Title V, provide a comprehensive framework for the siting, construction, upgrade, and maintenance of an on-site sewage disposal systems. The regulations recognize that sometimes a variance from strict compliance with these requirements may be appropriate. The regulations vest the authority to consider such requests for properties subject to local jurisdiction in the local approving authority, which is the Board of Health or its authorized agent or an agent of a health district 310 CMR 15.002. A property owner may request and the local approving authority may grant a variance from the provisions of 310 CMR 15. The regulations provide that a local approving authority may vary the application of any provision of the Title V regulations, and variances shall be granted only when, in the opinion of the local approving authority, both prongs of a two-part test are met. The applicant have established that enforcement of the provision of Title V from which variance is sought would be manifestly unjust, considering all the relevant facts and circumstances of the individual case. And two, the applicant has established that a level of environmental protection that is at least equivalent to that provided under Title V can be achieved without its strict application. 310 CMR 15.410(1), that was the reference. Great discretion is vested in the local approving authority, and variances are allowed but not required, even if an applicant satisfies both prongs of the two-part test. And then there are some precedent that was set. The Title V variance provision has been said to give broad discretion to the board based on the strong public interest in protecting health and the environment, and it may consider any factors bearing rationally on the actual demands that may be put on the system and the environment. For new construction, the threshold to obtain a variance is even higher. The regulations provide, with regard to variances for new construction, enforcement of the provision from which a variance is sought must be shown by the applicant to deprive the applicant of substantially all beneficial use of the subject property in order to be manifestly unjust. 310 CMR 410(2), emphasis added. This provision does not compel the granting of a variance, but instead is a limitation on the local approving authority's discretion to grant such variances. A showing by the applicant that they will be deprived of substantially all beneficial use of the property is a necessary condition to establish that the strict enforcement of Title V would be manifestly unjust, thus meeting the first prong of the two-part test required for the local approving authority to consider the granting a variance for new construction. However, an applicant deprived of substantially all beneficial use of a property is not entitled to a variance, and the local approving authority is never compelled to grant one. So we understand that we don't have to grant the variance. The problem is that we wanted to be sure that we were not going to be depriving the owner of all substantial use of the property and cause and be manifestly unjust. Jim, you've seen this. You see this before, and it's, I don't know if it's all typically regarding a neighbor and the well. We have a situation here where the well is how close to the leaching field, the proposed leaching field, the neighbor's well? Is it 50 feet? I think you're muted, Ted.
No, I believe it was 80 feet. I can pull it up right now just to get a quick measurement on it, but yeah. I have the plan up, but not the CAD, so. About 70.
70 feet. That's supposed to be 100.
Yeah.
Do you have
I
anything?
do have one comment on the letter.
Yeah,
If the board's
please.
not, if the board's at the,
Yeah, please make your comment now. Then we're going to go around and get comment from the board.
yeah, so this may be grasping at straws and splitting hairs. But I'm looking at this 2 prongs that must be satisfied. And if you look at number 2, the applicant has established that a level of environmental protection, at least equivalent to that under Title V, can be achieved. You know, we're not, you know, it just probably goes to a second level where we're not discussing environmental. So I would want to make sure that that level of environmental applies to obviously health, public health as well. Or is that implied? So I'm saying he mentions that we have to meet environmental standards. It doesn't say anything about health standards, which may be implied.
Yeah, I think anything under the board's purview, public health and environmental. And I think the major concern here, Ted, is that, you know, this well, you know, while the neighboring property does have access to town water, they are unfortunately not connected to town water at this juncture. Their well, while we can't say the current status of that well as far as it being potable or potentially contaminated, we do know that placing a septic system closer than 100 feet could potentially cause contaminants to arise in that well. And I think that's sort of where we got stuck. You know, we are not in the position of making anyone's well. Mr. Scott, if you could just please wait a few minutes and I'll get to the end of this. That's all right. So that's why we had a big question on this one. So Jim, I don't know if you want to speak before we go around the board for comment. But I'd like to give you that opportunity to fill us in on anything else that you know that we may not.
No, and again, we had talked about the placement of wells and new construction, and there is a section of Title V that states that it's a violation to put a system within 100 feet of a well. So again, that's the regulatory regime that you have.
Kevin Davis, any questions or comments?
No, I have no questions. My comment on this is that it's within 100 feet. I am not inclined to vote in favor of this at all. I just can't risk somebody else's potable water.
Okay. Dan Kane?
Thanks. I don't have any questions, I don't think. I mean, the plan is pretty clear. We've certainly talked about it. I'm kind of in that same place, that the location of the well is not the the fault of the petitioner, but the placement of the septic system within 100 feet is concerning. And while potentially fine, it could certainly be no issues. I've got a little bit of a concern with new construction placing a septic system that is not within Title V standard and potentially depriving a neighbor with existing systems use of their property. So it's a bit of a trade-off of whose property wins, and it's not a competition, but I'm a little bit concerned with new construction that is not compliant with Title V and the potential impact on an existing home structure, family well system. I think that's kind of where my concern is, and that's where it was before. I'm obviously concerned for the petitioner. I understand their desire to construct, but I am concerned with the potential impact on neighboring properties for new construction.
Thank you. Matt Wason, questions, comments?
No, along the same lines. It's the rule is there, and it's tough to see how any sort of system is going to somehow not impact the well. Even if you came out and said, well, we're going to put this kind of system in, there's no guarantees there. And so Title V tells us, don't go down that road. It's within 100 feet. This isn't a local regulation. This isn't a town regulation. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, could you please unmute yourself, state your name and address for the record?
Peter Scott, Littleton, Mass. I am the owner of the property. It's been in my family's possession for over 60 years. It is, had it been built back again in 1948, we wouldn't be having this discussion along with the other properties that are surrounding it. I've made offers to the neighbor to tie him into town water at absolutely no cost to him whatsoever, and to pay 2 years of his water bill, a reasonable water bill. And after a few months, he decided he didn't want to do it, where originally he was, semi-agreeable to it. I can understand your concerns about the well and how close it is, but if you look at the property that's directly across the street from him, I believe that one is within 80 feet of his well. So it's been granted in previous instances. The other thing is that I'll put in monitoring wells if you wish. I will still tie him into town water if he would be amenable to it. But if, again, this property, we've owned it. We've taxes on it for 60 years. And I don't believe that there's no way for the affluent to be able to travel 70 feet sideways. Water runs downhill and runs straight down. I don't see it would be any issue traveling in his direction. Plus his well is an artesian well, so it goes down through bedrock. And again, I'll put up monitoring wells. It's quite important to me that, we get to use, the land that it was intended for. It was intended to have a home built on it. It's kind of, I don't know, I suppose it's like, I bought we own the land, and it's like, I said it before, it's like buying a truck and you get a 5-year warranty and 50,000 miles. Well, after 6 months, the transmission goes, you go in and they say, oh, we don't honor that anymore. Sorry, you got to pay for your own transmission. It's kind of, the land was purchased under the intent of building a home. And I realize there are regulations to protect both the environment and neighbors. And I do believe that obviously with, Ted's design, he wouldn't design something in it and be in front of your board if he didn't think it was a safe and viable product to put in the ground and protect the other man's well. So with that instance, I still look at, a man's ability to own and use his property is as old as the Constitution. But I want to make sure that I do the right thing for the neighbor also. And I do believe that the design And again, with an artesian well going down through bedrock, the chances of anything getting down there is even less than slim and none. You know, I appreciate your concern on and your input towards it. So I don't really know what else to tell you. Perhaps Ted could explain the working areas of what exactly how a septic system works, if that's.
I mean, he's gone over the plan with us in depth, and
Okay.
you know, I think we all understand. We just I think that the thing we can't get over is that, you know, for new construction, the regulation says 100 feet, and you're at 80 or 70, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But you know, I'd like to open it up for public comment. You know, this whole conversation has sparked other thoughts I have about private wells and PFAS and other things in town, and we'll get to that. But I'd like to talk to the public. If anyone has a comment to make, please raise your hand now. Chris, when you're promoted, please state. So, Mr. Scott, can I'll keep you up there, but I'm going to promote Chris.
Sure.
Chris, please state your name and address.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Chris Krobeck. I'm at 105 Mattawanakie, the abutter with the well. And I just want to reiterate my concern about that I feel like that it would be unfair to potentially compromise the quality of the water of the well that's on my property. When I bought it, it was there, had it tested, it was good quality water. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to live here. And I feel like the proposed plan does not meet that threshold of safety for the maintaining the quality of the water that comes from my well. And that I don't think the use of the land is deprived. The neighbor does have a dock on his property, which is used often. It seems like in the end, it's up to the Board of Health to decide. And I respect that. And I just don't want to be in a situation where my water quality is compromised because of a decision that was unprecedented or unfair.
Well, thank you, Chris.
A couple of corrections I would like to check, requests from the board is the statement about the well being artesian. I don't know if that's been confirmed. I've tried to find out the history of the well, and I have not found any record checking through the Neshoba Boards of Health, through the Littleton Town. And the distance that was quoted, about 70 or 80 feet, I feel like if that is an important thing to confirm, I'd like to see that confirmed. I'm not sure if that was shown from the drawings. I don't have them in front of me. Those two things. Thanks.
Ted, could you just confirm that distance for us once more? You have the drawing up.
Yeah, 60 feet. Sorry, I just double checked. I did look closer because it was a quick check. So 60 feet. And just can I just make one clarification? You know, it may not matter, but when we're talking about artesian wells, an artesian well is a well that will actually spout up water on its own because the water pressure is so good in the aquifer that it comes up. This is all my analysis is based on a bedrock well, because any well that's been constructed in the last 50 years has been a bedrock well. And you can tell the type of well that it is by looking at the cap.
Anyone else in the any other public comment for the public hearing on 107 Mattawanakie Road? Please raise your hand now. It doesn't look like we have any more public comment. So we'll take a motion if anybody on the board has one. Anybody?
I'll make a motion that we deny the variance request.
I second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll take a roll call vote. Kevin Davis,
Kevin Davis, yes.
Dan Kane,
Dan Kane, yes.
Matt Wason,
Wason, yes.
and Kevin Baker votes yes. Thank you all. We appreciate it. We know this was a tough one. We will, I'm sure we'll be talking at some point soon.
Yeah, thanks for your time looking into this. I understand your opinion. As much as, I disagree with it, I'm not going to convince anybody today, just professionally, I would not put something forward that would threaten a well or public health or the environment. So that's where I'm at. You've got the regulations to your side. There's no real argument to be made right now.
Yeah, I think what
So,
you put forward was
thanks
the
for-
best possible thing that could happen on that property. I think you did a fantastic job squeezing it all in. I'm
Yeah.
sorry that the outliers, the other outside influences weren't working in your favor. They're beyond your control. What are you going to do? But I do think that tying into town water is a really important thing for everyone in Littleton, especially
Yeah.
with the compromised numbers we've been talking about as far as the quality goes. And so that this is going to be on our radar, and we'll likely we'll talk about it a little bit later during your discussion about how we're going to move
Yeah.
forward with water quality here.
Yeah, again, thanks for your time. Thanks for your empathy. And I know it was not an easy decision. So have a good night. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So we have a 7:25 public hearing on 234 Taylor Street, Sanctuary Medicinal. There's no variance request, but it's to discuss complaints on air pollution from the facility. Jim, why don't you kick us off with just some background? And I know everything's in the packet, and we have letters from the abutters.
Sure. So I had asked to have this put on the agenda so that kind of bring the board up to speed of what's happening up there. I've been involved with the facility almost since since I moved in. There's some septic system issues early on to upgrade the facility. At some point in time, we started getting odor complaints in the neighborhood. We met with the facility. They made some adjustments to whether it's filters or trying to isolate rooms within the inside of the building has multiple uses, and their own tech report kind of indicates that sometimes you get odors that kind of puff out of it. After they made the changes, the number of complaints seemed to go down. Recently, we started getting complaints again. So again, I met with the facility. And my recommendation this time was that, maybe they have a HVAC engineer come out, take a look at the building, make some recommendations. Again, it seems like they're getting odor out of the building at certain times when doors are open or a combination of doors are open. But again, you'll get the odor from time to time. I think you've seen some of the complaints from the neighbors. The state has a set of air regulations, air pollution regulations, 310 CMR 7. I think the letter that I had sent, the most recent letter I had sent, kind of describes both air contaminant and air pollution. And the standard is what it is. I mean, and one of those things, if your actions of putting something into the air causes someone to not have the normal enjoyment, or however that's worded, of the property, then it could be considered an air pollution. What does it say? Interfere with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property, or conduct business. So
Yeah, it certainly seems like that's happening.
and so
Is there anyone, who are we looking for from the facility? Because there's a bunch of names here.
Nick is
There we go. Okay, Nick, here we go.
Property. And then Thomas Mackey, I think, is the attorney for the facility, and then
Right.
Tech Environmental, I think, is those are the names I know.
Okay, I'm promoting Thomas Mackey and Nick Setnery.
And so just, I guess, one last thing about the
Yeah,
enforcement of dust and odor complaints. We've been instructed by DEP that it's kind of a combination of intensity and frequency. If it's a mild odor that happens from time to time, not necessarily considered a condition of air pollution. If it's happening all the time, and it's really strong, again, those kinds of considerations, and that determination is made at the property line. So, I mean, and again, it's happened from time to time that I've driven by the site and get the odor in the car and it kind of stays with you. I've been on, other parts, whether it's Liberty Square Road or over on Hill Road a little bit, and you pick up the smell. So it happens. Has it risen to the level of enforcement? That's the part. I don't know that it's happening with the frequency that I would recommend to the board enforcement. But one of the things that's happening is I think they're looking to put an addition onto the building. And even looking at the tech report from back in 2020, they mentioned that might be a time, once they put an addition on, to consider some additional HVAC.
I think we're
balancing study. Yeah.
So we need to learn more about what's happening and why it's happening. And I'm sure Nick, when you get on, just please state your name and your address for the record. But I'm sure Nick can tell us if other facilities are faced with this issue. What are some of the corrections that they have made at other facilities that maybe we can look at making here in Littleton to appease some of the neighbors who are just, uncomfortable and being affected with the air pollution. So, Nick, if you could just state your name and your address for the record, that'd be appreciated. And Brenda, I tried to promote Thomas Mackey. It's not allowing me to.
Greetings.
Oh, okay. Yep. Hi.
Hey, greetings, everybody. This is Nicholas Satmary, 234 Taylor Street. Thanks for having me on, Jim. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I thought also we want to have Patricia from the tech environment, Rosa, also get promoted. I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. Is Patricia with you?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
My apologies, Nick.
yep. No, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Patricia, I'm promoting you now. There you go. So Nick, you sort of heard the story of what we're faced with here. We have, I don't know if all the letters and all of the recording and the reports of the different instances,
Yes.
air pollution. I don't know if you've seen them all. But I'm wondering, I kind of have an idea. I'd probably like to come down and take a look at the facility to see if there's anything, but you guys, I'm sure, have sorted out all solutions. So what's going on? How do we fix it? Tell me.
Yeah, and please, anytime, please come by. I'm sure I could share my contact with you. I know, Jim, you have my contact information, so please come by anytime to see the facility. But I have not seen all the complaints, but we'll start off with, the building. We are right next to a residential area. That does make it hard. Cannabis is a very fragrant flower. And I've done a lot to try to work with the neighbors and any concerns that they have. But within building the facility, my background's commercial agriculture. I started growing tomatoes about 12 years ago in the Netherlands, and then started growing cannabis about 10 years ago. And with this facility, I built, at this time, I have built a total of 5 facilities of totaling upwards of $150 million for the 5 facilities and build out. This facility in particular, in Littleton, we put in an HVAC system. It was right around $3.2 million to not only obviously take care of the plants, but a big part of that was to put in a big filtration system called Secure Air. That's used in actually hospitals, emergency rooms and whatnot to help with the smell. And I believe we moved in, correct me if I'm wrong, 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago. And as Jim mentioned, there's been some complaints here and there, and we've tried to not only work on the facility, but then work on our internal procedures. I know if you have that packet, an example of that is, as we're taking in deliveries, the loading dock door, and keeping that open, right? That's a very easy thing. And, I will say, as I'm working in the facility, as anybody's working in the facility, you get desensitized to the smell very quickly. So, the employees at the loading dock, okay, leave the door open, not think anything of it. And that might happen. So over those years, what we did, we have that big filtration system in. Big thing I think in the beginning was we were working on the building and cutting new holes in the side for the HVAC systems. I remember back then there were multiple complaints right around that time, and basically we were working on the facility as we were permitted to also cultivate in there. So that caused an issue, and we had to seal that up very quickly. Now we're sealed. We've done a few things also. So internal procedures we worked on. The building is equipped with a pressure system. So, if the pressure of the building goes out of set point, there are exhaust fans, 2 exhaust fans on the roof that will kick on just to stabilize the pressure very quickly. Now it's the shell. And as you mentioned, you'd like to stop by to see really how it's set up and what's going on. So the shell of the building is existing. Inside the building is built out of USDA grade panels. They're insulated, basically freezer panels, and we built all of our rooms in there. And as Jim mentioned, there are multiple uses in that building, cultivation, there's commercial kitchen, whatnot. Everything is built out of these panels, which contains that the air within and the smell. A big part of cultivating any plant is to maximize its efficiency. One thing that we do is we supplement CO2 into those rooms. Plants breathe CO2, they release oxygen. So we do, we supplement a lot of CO2 into those rooms. So I don't want anything escaping, any air escaping those rooms, those cultivation rooms. And that's where the smell really is. We have 8 big cultivation rooms in there, all at different life stages. And towards the plant's end of its life, that's when the fragrances are the strongest. But anyway, we try to seal those rooms as tight as we can anyway. I don't want anything leaving. I spend a lot of money on CO2 for that. But those exhaust fans on the roof to stabilize the pressure, one thing that we did, and even though they're not on for a long time to stabilize that, I did bring in an engineer to implement an ozone filtration system within those ozone generator to completely just destroy any odor that comes out of there. So now there's a 20-foot, I think over 20-foot duct with a big commercial ozone generator, so that when that kicks on, that ozone generator will also kick on. So that's another thing we did over the last few years. Then we brought in the Tech Environmental Group, which Patricia here, and we had them do a study, as you saw in the packet, to see really the intensity of the smell, and then also make suggestions on the building of what we could do. And one thing was airlocks within the building, on the entrances, exits. And so to eliminate any issues with compliance, ADA compliance, fire code and whatnot, make it easier, I found air curtains that basically block any air going in or out when the doors opened. So we also implemented those, and I think that helped a lot within that shell, within that internal area. So anybody coming or going goes through those doors, and the air curtains will kick on when the doors open, kind of blocking any odor or smell, air going in or out. So that was one thing, but we did just re-engage them, the environmental group, to kind of re-look over the building, make some new suggestions. And since the shell there is kind of open on the top, I think we're going to look into kind of making some changes to how it's pressurized, where it's pressurized, what the system is. And I think we have a good
Was this a recommendation of the analyst that came in? I guess Patricia came back and Tech Environmental came back and said one other thing you can do is.
Yes, and this was just recently, and so we're taking their suggestions, but we're looking through all possibilities. But another thing is to look into that shell and how we can pressurize areas within, and kind of block off other areas to just contain that smell to where it really is. I want to move to the expansion just briefly. That expansion on the back end, 15,000 square feet, there's no cultivation. It's just needed for manufacturing space, packaging and whatnot. But in doing that, that'll allow us to actually contain that smell a little bit better. As that loading dock, we're going to kind of create a pathway back there where now we don't have much entry or exit. going in there. So that expansion should actually benefit us. And in doing so, you know, we'll be able to look over the building. But I just wanted to mention that. So we're working on doing everything. You know, I try to be a good neighbor. I work with everybody. And Jim, you know, we've met a few times. We just had that septic issue. So I want to make everybody comfortable and
Do you have,
do as much as we can.
do you have carbon filters on those exhaust fans?
No carbon. So carbon, it does work. We do have carbon scrubbers inside, but they need to be changed out a lot. So those exhaust fans, the ozone would actually react with that. So the ozone's really, you know, a fail-less item as long as they keep running, which there's a whole building management system that shows if they are. So, you know, a carbon filter, you know, a couple $100 carbon filter you have to change out here and there. They're good. They do work, but not as well as the ozone system that really destroys any odor.
We'll go around the board for questions and comments. Kevin Davis.
Hi there. Sorry, my picture's not happening to rise up here, but I've done actually a considerable amount of study and work on this right at the moment. And so the first thing I did is I looked to other communities that have faced these things. I've looked at Denver, I've looked at Vancouver, I've looked at Ottawa, and I've looked at San Francisco. Denver seems to have actually produced a packet for the best practices of the management guide. And inside that packet on page 49, they actually have several pages about air quality, not only air quality within the system or within the facility, but also air quality outside. And one of the things that they talked about is the best solution to mitigate some of these odors and VOCs, or BVOCs actually, as they're called, is actually carbon filtration. And it says, quote, "Carbon filtration is currently the best control technology for reducing VOC emissions from cannabis cultivation facilities. Carbon filters are simple, inexpensive, and easy to install, effective, reliable, and when properly maintained and replaced. These filters work by using an absorption process," and it goes on a whole bunch of stuff like that. The filtration can remove between 50 and 90%, 98% of the VOCs, all that kind of good stuff. It talks about when you actually harvest the plants and how you're processing the plants. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that it talks about. That's just the first paper that I found. The second paper that I found goes into talking about ozone and how the ozone and the smell of cannabis actually increases. So as there is more ozone in the air, the actual smell of cannabis increases. And that's due to a chemical reaction between the ozone and the terpenes and other chemicals that are within the VOCs. So whether or not that's a true testament, it is a scientific paper basically saying that's probably one of the worst things to go off and do. In fact, they talked about monitoring the ozone that's naturally outside of the building and limiting the venting and processing depending upon the level of ozone that is naturally in the air, as the ozone around it actually increases the smells. So that's there. I also went into a whole bunch of other air quality reports and things like that. So that's there. I actually stopped by the facility a couple of days ago and was out on the edge of the facility. I would like to actually attend that, walk around through the facility and things like that. But basically, there are, when I was there, there wasn't a strong smell of the odor, but as I walked the property line, I could smell it quite easily. So that's there. I've also been receiving daily emails from several neighbors of the facility, and basically they're detailing dates and times and level of odor for the facilities and things like that. So while I will defer to Patricia and Nick as they are the experts, I've starting to amass enough information that we're going to need some more time to try to figure this out and what's going on. So, yeah.
Thanks for digging in and doing that research.
Yep, I'll keep going. I've got about another
And
20 articles to go off of.
it's super helpful for the neighbors to come, document, times of days and keep track of days and times so that, when we show this to Nick, he's like, oh, that's when we were doing this.
Exactly.
So, that will help them say like, okay, when we're processing this piece of it, That's what, to make sure we swapped out that carbon filter already or whatever. the
Yeah,
kitchen.
yeah, totally. And I'm all for that. The other thing is that, like, you know, for example, in a 2019 study at Denver, Colorado, found that as the VOCs emissions from the local cannabis cultivation were released, the hourly ozone went from 0.3 parts per billion in the morning to 0.67 parts per billion. So it's a huge increase that's happening just depending upon what they're actually doing inside of that. So,
Well,
Absolutely.
Dan Kane.
So odor control with any of these kind of places is any kind of institution that's producing odors is a challenge. I've certainly been through this in previous positions where trying to control, in this case, it's a controlled environment, and it sounds like you're doing great work trying to manage it. Agreed. I think we need a little bit more research. It sounds like it got better. It sounds like you are looking at improving your capability for odor control and odor release with your expansion. I'm back to agree with Kevin for looking at dates and times, trying to compare it to weather situations, wind, operational, changes in the building. Okay, it's every Tuesday at 10 a.m. we're loading a truck. And, so that when you identify patterns, it's much easier to identify sources and problems and then therefore solutions. So I would love to see your environmental engineer, perhaps work with Jim and the neighbors to be able to identify whether it's an email box that, when we have something, we send it to Jim, the general board of health email box, and whoever your contact is at Sanctuary, just go, hey, this is happening, be aware. And you can do that quick. Okay, what's going on now? And we can also trend over time of going, are there patterns that we can address? Is it weather? Is it external resources, external factors, or is it an operational piece you may be able to address? As far as ozone versus is carbon, I'm going to defer to the environmental engineers. Certainly, we all know, there are concerns with ozone at ground level, so that is a concern. I don't know what your output is and how that disperses, but ozone at ground level is a concern, both for your employees and for the neighborhood, depending on the disbursement. But I think at this point, I appreciate you're working with the neighbors and you're trying to address it. Certainly, I've been in that neighborhood for, my other occupation, and certainly it's been noticeable most of the time I've been in that neighborhood, but I haven't been there, I admit, in a few months. So I certainly understand the concerns of the neighbors. I hear you. I think this is cooperative effort here of look for the patterns and let's see what we can do to fix it from an operational perspective and work from there with the environmental engineers.
Matt Wason.
I concur with everything said so far. I appreciate it. Thanks for all the research, Kevin. Is there any scientific way to measure what's going on? I have researched this very little, but is there an
of one?
olfactometer that
there actually is a really cool thing. Sorry to interject, Matt.
please?
There's a nose, I forget the name of it, a nose something that basically is a trained nose person that can go out and look at this. There were 2 studies which I found that basically set up a time frame for collecting air samples over a 2-week period and all that kind of good stuff, and then analyze it afterwards. So there is documented ways of going after the terpenes and all the other pieces.
And actually, Patricia's got her hand raised. Just state your name and address, and I'll promote Michael as well. It seems like he's got something to say, but Patricia first.
Yes, Patricia Rosa from Tech Environmental, 303 Wyman Street. Michael Lannon actually is the president of Tech Environmental, so he can speak more on that if you let him into the panel.
Okay, yeah, Michael's here as well. Michael, just state your name and address. The record. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just went out of public mode to private mode and my screen blew up, so I didn't know.
Just state your name and address.
Michael Lannon, Tech Environmental, president of Tech Environmental.
Thank you.
So,
So we just had questions on how to monitor the smell outside.
right. So the meter that you were talking about is a nasal ranger. That's one. It's a method to do measurements of odor dilution of threshold at fence lines, but it's good mostly for sources. It doesn't work as well as the fence line. We prefer to use the butanol scale, which is an intensity scale instead of a concentration of dilution scale. And that's an ASTM method as well. They both use them. And that's really how we sort of quantify it. And we had done that previously. And then we did that once right before this meeting so far as we were just recently engaged. So we've only done it once. And it's clear that, right now based on this one, and I don't want to call it anecdotal, but one data point. If I draw lines for the one data point, it's better than it was before, or at least the same or less than before with the changes they've made. One other comment with respect to carbon and the ozone. As many of the facilities, we do a lot of reviewing of marijuana facilities in Massachusetts and for cities and towns. And part of that process is we want to make sure that there are sort of belts and suspenders so that you're not just relying on one technology. So I understand that there is a concern about ozone with respect to partial decomposition. But the point of the way the system is set up is that the carbon is used indoors, and the air inside the building is constantly recirculating through that, so that the majority of the odor can be knocked down with that, and then it's sort of polished through the ozone on the way out. Our site visit does not suggest that it appears to be from the exhaust points in the building. It's more related to sort of when there are doors opening and closing. The area where the CO2 is located is extremely tight. But then, of course, people passing through hallways and so on. The air curtains have worked to some extent, but we recommended also sort of including pressurization. So simply pressurizing the vestibule up front and the area between the offices and the processing area would be very helpful, and they're looking into that as well.
Yeah, so that's sort of the same report that we got from our agent, Mr. Gariffi, just doors and sort of the use of the space and all the technical aspects and the equipment are sort of working fine, except for the people that are opening and closing the doors and, getting stuff where it needs to go.
Right.
So
that's why it's
that system and your findings can be implemented in this establishment so that the neighbors outside aren't affected, and we don't have complaints coming in about it. That would be the way to go, I think, at this point, and incorporating any other sort of mitigation techniques you can at the same time.
Right. Yeah, because one of the concerns is that office area has a little bit of odor in it, and those HVAC systems don't have the control on them because that area is not supposed to be.
It's just an office. Yeah,
it's just an office. So when you pressurize these areas and you keep the odor out of there, it won't just be going out through the other system. And and there's some other things that they're working on with respect to dehumidification and other things that will help.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be great, Mr. Lannon, if you could put together some sort of report or in tandem with Nick, what are we doing? What are we working on? These olfactory, what did you call them? Nose ranger?
It's called the nasal ranger.
Nasal ranger. Yeah. If those sorts of things are going to be put in place, we'd certainly love to know about it. Just to let us know that.
Right. So while I have you, I'll give a teeny little bit of odor 101.
Okay.
So that I don't prefer the nasal ranger. I prefer the intensity scale, because the difference is when you have a nasal, normally when you do odor dilution to threshold measurements, you take a sample there, you send it to a laboratory, a panel of individuals that have been screened for having normal odor capabilities measure it, and then the concentration is decided at 50% of a group of panelists. Okay. The problem with that in the field is there's only one person with the nasal ranger in front of their face, right? So I find it very valuable if you're at a source and it's very strong. Okay. What I find more valuable is the intensity scale. So we have jars of butanol, and it's a compound that has odor, but it's not a pleasant odor and it's not an unpleasant odor. And that's why it's used for the scale. And there's a 9-point scale and there's a 5-point. The lower 5 points are the ones that are used for off-site type of things. The higher numbers would only be like in an industrial facility. It's used often. We use it often at around wastewater treatment plants and landfills and composting facilities and varnish manufacturers and food processing facilities. So it's not just associated with this, it's really used quite a bit. And that's kind of what we have been using, because the benefit of this is that, say you and I have slightly different odor capabilities, you can smell better than I can. You smell the jar, it's stronger to you than when I smell the jar, but so is the odor you're experiencing. So what it does is it normalizes everybody who's looking at it to the same scale, and that we can really then tell how things are improving or not improving.
Interesting.
So that's enough of that.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, at this point, I see you guys are working towards a solution to try and eliminate some of the complaints, and some of the problems that the neighbors are having, and we appreciate that. I think probably the board's best course of action is to wait for that sort of mitigation report from you guys. What's being put in place now and what will be put in place and looked at over the next, say, month or so. And we'll keep receiving potentially notes from folks, and we'll pass that on to you guys as far as the dates and times for which these occurrences are happening.
Right.
And then maybe what we can do is continue this hearing for, say, maybe a month from now.
Right.
And then revisit, based on sort of what's been done and how the neighbors are feeling about it. And maybe Kevin and I can come down and just take a look at, different mitigations and get an education on what.
Sure. Yeah, and just to be clear, like, we have a nasal ranger, and if that's what you prefer that we use, we could do that. But I think
You're
I
the
would
professionals, whatever is
Yeah.
going to work better and
Okay.
get the job done that needs to get done. Then
Okay, great.
so-
Okay. Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
Any other? Is there any public comment from anyone in the audience? Please raise your hand now. Matt Wason.
I wasn't quite done. So one other is that, yes, when you come back, I'd like to see whatever quantifiable data you have collected, if you could, in that report of what you did previously and what you did presently. You just said that it got better, but then maybe you said it was about the same.
Well,
So
as an engineer, I can't draw any conclusions with one set of data. That's not reasonable. That's why I'm saying it's either the same or less based upon this one data point. And so I don't have enough information yet. We were just engaged to work on this. We worked on it back in 2019 or 2020.
I understand.
Yeah, okay.
It's just been stated already twice on this call that it got better. And as you're pointing out, the data is actually not sufficient to say that it's gotten better. So I would like to see the data, if you can, in the report that says, here's what it was, here are the steps that we took, and here's what it is now. And if it is better, great. But if we don't feel it's quite at the right threshold, because I just want to help build a more structured plan than just go try a couple things and cross our fingers, if you understand. I'm also an engineer.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that
Awesome.
way, when you come back to the next meeting, you can say, well, here, either we've done more remediation and now here's what it looks like, or these are our next attempts at remediation and this is what we expect to achieve. That's what I would like to see if we could.
Okay.
And Kevin, if I could, I don't know if we should set the return date just on our own. I would like to know when they think they could have some change in place.
Oh, okay.
So that, what's a reasonable time frame? Obviously, if you ask for a year, we're going to say no. But what's a good time frame to come back to revisit this?
That's a great question, Matt. This is Nick Satmary. I would say, it may be a few months if we're going to do what Michael is suggesting about some pressurization within the facility. That might take a little bit of build out time. And you're an engineer in building things, you know how long that might take. I would recommend a few months. Obviously right away I'm going to start and when we have started, obviously engaging with Michael and getting back into this, do everything I can to mitigate any concern and odor. But I would propose 3 months.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that input, Nick. Then I would say, why don't you come back in 6 weeks, understanding that you won't have any sort of construction or change done by then, but you'll have an update for us on the planning and potentially any standard work issues with people that might have changed to improve anything.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
This is Kevin again. I would also like to also, based off of the data that we're receiving from the neighbors, also either have Mr. Greffy or Michael plot where the complaints are coming from in relation to the facility. So that way we understand on a map locus, is it 10 miles away, 2 miles away, next door, that type of thing.
Which way is the wind blowing?
Yeah, exactly. So that would be helpful as well.
And Nick, do you have someone like day to day that, is in front of their email that could, respond to something in like 5 minutes if our admin sends something there? I can pass it along to you, just say like it's happening now and put that in your data set and pass it on to Michael. I mean, is there someone there that can
I think everybody's running around always. It could be sent to me. And I could do my best. If it's sent in an email, obviously I have a timestamp. I'll be able to know right then and there. And I'm usually at my email. I have my phone on me 24/7, so I'll be able to see it and then reach out to the facility if I'm not there. Whatever.
Okay. So those issues, we'll send those right to you.
Yes, please.
Okay. And then I just saw Mr. Mackey had his hand up quickly. There were no public comment, but Mr. Mackey, I'm going to just ask you to unmute and state your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name's Thomas Mackey, and I'm with a firm called Burns and Levinson at 125 High Street in Boston. Thanks a lot. This is good feedback. Jim already has a copy of the executive summary of the report that was done in 2019. The reason is only 11 pages long. The report itself is like 100 pages, I think, Mr. Wason, and we can get you that definitive report. That'll have the data from the monitoring that Mike did in 2019. And then you have something, Mike, you gave me with regard to last week, I think, but it's not necessarily comparable given the limited scope, but we have to talk with Nick about what would happen in terms of any further monitoring. But if we can get some coordination with regard to if folks are giving feedback on when they're smelling something, maybe we can put something together to look a little bit more closely. But the short version of that is we can get you the older report. The new one, not necessarily ready for prime time yet because it's only 1 day's of data.
Okay, great.
Does that make sense, Mike Lannon? Or Mr. Chairman, may I ask Mike Lannon that question?
Yeah, please.
Mr. Chairman, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. And one other thing, Mr. Lannon, does it make sense for us to include you in the timestamped emails from when the neighbors are having issues so that you can put that in your computer and sort of figure out where it's all coming from?
Actually, that would be Patricia would be great for that.
Patricia, okay. Patricia. Perfect. We do have a hand up from the public. Let me promote. Kathleen, I just promoted you. Could you please state your name and address for the record?
Say it again, Kevin.
Kathleen, please state your name and address for the record.
She may have to.
Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, I lost you for a minute when I thought I clicked on you. My name is, I can't see anything now, but can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Kathy Scully. I live at 240 Taylor Street at the far end across from Liberty Square Park. So I'm on the same side as Medicinal Sanctuaries. Very briefly, I want to say I appreciate the efforts of everybody, including Nick. And then I didn't catch all the names and now I can't see any of your names, but I do appreciate
We all hear you and we thank you.
Okay. I stopped working in late 2019. So I've been home a lot more. I did not notice too many odors at all prior to my, when I was working full time. But I beg to disagree respectfully that the odor has decreased in terms of frequency. I have distant relatives and or friends who will come and visit, and the minute they open their car door, some people recognize the odor right away as cannabis, and others say, "Oh, you must have a skunk somewhere hiding." And it varies throughout the day, so that I just wanted to state that on the record that I don't think it has decreased, though I do appreciate all the efforts that Nick says that he has made. And if it is a matter of just the doors being open and closing, they must be opening and closing for an awful long period of time and frequently, because it really does vary from timing throughout the day. And if I open my doors or my windows, it's pretty prominent, and I don't know how far away I am in terms of miles or yards or whatever, but I'm not that far away. But I do smell it fairly frequently. And I guess that's all that I need to say, other than I really do appreciate the efforts that everybody is making to try to diminish it.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. We appreciate it. And, on Mr. Wason's recommendation, I'm going to make a motion to continue this hearing until June 14th. That's a solid 6 weeks. And I think that Mr. Lannon and Patricia Rosa and Nick, we can put together a good plan and see what we can do to help mitigate some of these things. Mr. Wason just had to drop off his computer, had an issue. So I'll make a motion to continue this meeting until June 14th.
I second that.
Motion in the second, roll call vote. Kevin Davis.
Kevin Davis, yes.
Dan Kane.
Dan Kane, yes.
And Kevin Baker votes yes. So thank you, everybody, for all your help, and we look forward to resolving this issue further on June 7th.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So moving on, we have a discussion on the opioid settlement funds. And I know, Dan, you had heard from town administrator, sort of where things are, and it seems like we did receive the first round of funding, and we are on track to receive that second round of funding, but there's a third round of funding that you're not sure of yet.
So I'm happy to share what little I know about this.
Please.
Is it okay if I share my screen,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chair?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So as part of the national opiate settlement that Massachusetts was part of through the AG's office, each community in Massachusetts was basically slotted a percentage of the funds based on population. So there was a total of 7 individual settlements that make up the total.
Mm.
There was one with the manufacturer, Johnson & Johnson Janssen being a fully owned subsidiary. So you'll see J&J and Janssen used kind of interchangeably in different places, was one settlement. There's one with the distributors, the middlemen, basically, that moved it from the manufacturer to the individual vendors. And then there were 5 individual settlements with the major vendors within Commonwealth, which are Walmart, Teva, Allergan, CVS, and Walgreens. When last we spoke, we know we have signed off as agreeing to be part of the Massachusetts settlement with Johnson & Johnson as well as the distributors. And as of the AG's report from a few days ago, we've received $46,145.28, which is, I'm not going to say down to the penny, but that is consistent with the numbers that have been shared from the interim town administrator. We have also been told we are expecting a total of about $178,000 total, which would match the remaining funds coming from the distributor settlement. I did ask after the Middlesex AG's opiate task force meeting a few days prior to our last meeting, where they shared that the paperwork to sign off to participate in those last 5 settlements, basically with the individual vendors, the pharmacies, easiest to say, needed to be completed by the following Tuesday, which was mid-April. I apologize. I can't remember the date. So we shared that with town administration, basically just a question of this was shared. We didn't know. Again, that was the first, my attending the task force meeting was the first I'd heard of our share of the money, or that there was paperwork to be done. The Johnson & Johnson and the distributor funds had been signed off because we have already had the J&J funds, sounds like fully dispersed. The distributors are doing an annuity basically through 2038 for their total volume, or their total payment. But we did not have an answer whether we had actually signed off as participating in those last 5 settlements. And it wasn't clear. The town administrator's office said, oh, we've signed on them and we've already received funds. And that matched that $46,000 number, but we never actually gotten confirmation for those 5 additional settlements. I followed up beginning of the week, just to, it's after the date, but just to clarify, because the numbers that have been shared from the town administrator's office, as well as the select board, they actually talked about it very, very briefly on Monday night's meeting, match what we've already seen, but there was no mention of the remaining 5 settlements, which comes up to about $176,000 between now and 2029. So a significant financial resource for our community to address substance abuse. I've not heard back from the town administrator. I do know from the select board, they had a very, very brief discussion that the Coalition for Substance Abuse was going to be looking at this and trying to identify how best to utilize these funds. The funds are, per the Department of Revenue, required to go into the general fund. So obviously any expenditures are going to be at the guidance of town meeting. How they're utilized is limited by the settlement. And there's lots of options, but it really is around opiate and substance abuse, education, mitigation, treatment, criminal justice diversion, finding alternate routes from other than simply the criminal justice system for folks who are having issues with opiate use or dependence. So how we can use it is limited, but it would obviously at this point be at the behest of the select board, the FinCom, and town meeting of how that money is utilized, whether it's a revolving fund governed by somebody. We don't know what that body is.
Right.
I did go to look at the Coalition for Substance Abuse here in Littleton.
Coalition Against Addiction.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry. It is actually currently housed from the website under the police department. And unfortunately, when you go to that website under the police department, it is password protected. So we unfortunately can't see what their meeting plans are, who's currently on the coalition. There's no data, at least publicly available on the from their designated website on the town website. So certainly I'm not sure if there is any Board of Health or our health agent, Neshoba Associated, or public health nurses. I simply don't know if there's a Board of Health representative on the coalition. And Kevin, you've been on longer than the rest of us. Perhaps you're aware of a public health representative to that coalition. We lost Kevin. We're going to pause, I think, for a moment because we just lost our quorum. Oh, wait, there he is. He's back. Okay.
Sorry. I heard most of it. I
think the question is, if it sounds like the select board and their representative to the Coalition for Substance Abuse has said that they are planning on looking at the funding and how best to utilize it. I do not know if there's a Board of Health or health department or a public health professional or group represented on that coalition. I'm not sure how that was structured, appointed. I don't know that model.
I think it's Nicole Sarvella, who's the assistant director of Littleton Elder and Human Services, is I think one of the founders and maybe the person in charge of the Coalition Against Addiction. So I've invited her to speak with us at our next meeting. and she'd be happy to prepare something, sort of a, just a little bit of an educational piece maybe, and then, some ideas and some concepts about how best to distribute the funds that'll best serve our community. And then we could talk about it with her guidance as a board, and then hopefully come up with something for town meeting, to reflect an article and disbursement, and how those funds are going to be sort of put out there. So if that sounds
That's great.
if that sounds okay with you guys. But Ryan, town administrator, said he would encourage the Board of Health to consider how the funds are allocated. So yeah, I think that's our purview, and we should do our best to make sure it gets done correctly. So
I was gonna say, the more voices at the table, the better, because it's obviously a multifaceted issue from, schools and law enforcement and first response and healthcare and elder services. It's all of us. So the more voices, the better. So yeah, certainly if we can work with Nicole to identify who's currently making up the coalition and how best we can work together as a community to address it.
Yeah.
I did share out the settlement agreement of how municipalities can use the abatement funds as well. So we can look at that offline as some starting points of how, what the acceptable criteria may be best for Littleton. They also encourage utilizing regional approaches in some cases where, Littleton probably can't necessarily justify a half an FTE for an outreach person, or, someone to work with law enforcement for criminal justice diversion. But perhaps, it's a coalition that, again, just picking things at random, but Air and Acton and Littleton and Boxbar and Harvard may work together to have one FTE for, as an availability that they can utilize for known problems. Please identify, an issue and an opportunity to intervene very quickly with options other than, lock up and the criminal justice system. So those are options, again, that they are also pushing as well, utilizing regional resources and sharing some of those funds when possible to get the biggest impact.
great. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate it. It's amazing. The town thanks you for just being on top of it and making sure those funds hit the account. So for administrative matters, we got those meeting minutes last minute, so I don't think anybody's really had a chance to read them. Public correspondence, I think we've discussed everything that we've had. Let me just see who's in the audience here. No one's in the audience, but if there are any other board member updates, comments for discussion. Kevin Davis, go ahead.
So one thing I would like to express, Dan, thank you so much for digging into that. That was awesome and amazing. The thing that I would like to express now is if the town has missed out on half of a bunch of money because someone didn't fill out the right form and get it in on time, I'd be very disappointed in our efforts. So I'm hopeful, fingers crossed, that got submitted and didn't get missed, because
yeah, everything we ran around the last minute because we were unsure and we didn't have the former town administrator on site to give us that clarification. But Ryan, I guess, was able to look that up in Munis and get that
excellent.
Get us notified before the long weekend, because the town hall was closing at noon. I think I was there on Thursday after our meeting, and then Monday was Patriots Day and Tuesday it was due. So, and then we had a okay weekend.
So hats off to all those people that went running around and did all that stuff. That's amazing. Thank you. I appreciate it. The other thing is that, with the Cannabis Control Commission and stuff like that, I'm actually reaching out to the Cannabis Control Commission regarding the sanctuary stuff, because it's kind of odd. One of the things, when I was reading through all the paperwork from different areas like Denver, California, Vancouver, and all those places, the very first statement in all of their paperwork is that cannabis processing facilities will increase dramatically the nuisance odors produced from those facilities straight away. And what I'm doing is I wanted to reach out to the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission and say, hey, do you have anything similar to Denver or Vancouver or whatever about odor control in these facilities? And I haven't gotten anything back yet from anybody on that. Because I just reached out on Tuesday for those.
Read that line one more time.
Cannabis processing facilities are known to increase nuisance odors. Nuisance odors will dramatically increase around the adjacent properties for all cannabis processing facilities. It's
What is that? Fair warning?
yeah. It's just a known thing that, you know, when you do this, there will be odors, and that's one of the things that you have to do when you put in one of these facilities, is that a processing facility like this, you need to have these mitigations in effect, strong mitigations.
And mitigations that can be improved upon as the odors increase. You need to increase your mitigation. Now I understand.
Not only mitigations, but you also have, I'll send Brenda this so she can send it out to the board.
Okay.
Some of the stuff from Denver, and it's pretty telling.
So, I mean, they've been at it far longer, I think, than Massachusetts.
Yeah, 2010. They've been at it from 2010 or 2012. They've been at it a lot longer than Massachusetts. So I'm doing that.
That's great.
I also reached out to the Department of Public Health, asking some questions if they ever had another town in the state of Massachusetts deal with some of these things. And I haven't heard back from them yet either. So I am trying to do that. I've started putting a lit table together of all the literature research that I've done. I put about 3 hours of time into doing the literature research and the deep dive. So doing all that fun stuff.
Well,
so that way we can get smart on what's going on. Also, the Nasal Ranger is kind of a cool thing.
Nasal Ranger.
It is a whole process. And I'm sorry I'm going into this, but it was just, they walk around with what looks like a cone off of their nose. And it's kind of funny. It looks like a long beak to a bird that they put in front of their nose, and they can pretty much, figure stuff out. And like I said, there's a couple of papers that have detailed approaches to measuring all these different things. And a lot of the smells that they're talking about, the skunky smell and stuff like that, is actually because of a very specific VOC. And yeah, they're called cannabis thiols. And avoiding neutralization by dry vapor were dispersing across significant distances under some weather conditions. And it's difficult to exactly pinpoint where the neighbors would get the high concentrations or low concentrations depending upon wind and all. There's lots of research. So anyway, point that I'm trying to make is that I don't know if this is a quick, easy fix. I know neighbors have been really pushing hard for this. So hopefully we can start to get some work together, sort of kind of stuff on this.
And a lot of it might just be like, how when you have to call the fire department to find out if it's a burn day or not because of air pressure and humidity on the atmosphere, like that just might be it. You just might have these days where it's more pronounced, and even through all reasonable efforts to mitigate the odor, it's just someone's going to smell it somewhere.
The problem is that the definition of a nuisance odor and what we're protecting against, basically, you read it. It's like, the happiness quotient. And if the person's happiness quotient is affected by the odor, we have a duty to go off and solve it.
Yeah, no, I know.
So anyway, yeah. And the other thing, and one last thing, and then I'll be quiet. It was several months ago. It was before this even came in. One of our neighbors basically was doing has an individual, a high schooler that does a lot of running around the area, and that high schooler made a comment one day. He goes, "Oh yeah, I actually have to change my running route to go around this, because if I run across the front or around a certain area of that, I can walk away with a contact high as bad as it smells." And I'm just like, so granted, it's from a high schooler, but it's just something to think about as we're going through it. I'm like, okay, now I understand. So that's it. That's all I got. Sorry I was late.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you for all your hard work. It's good.
Kevin?
Yes.
So, Kevin Davis,
Yes, sir.
Department of Environmental Protection generally handles odor controls, and so I can send you Michelle Delmar, who's kind of the person to
Okay.
deal with her contact. She actually sent me a letter from one of the facilities I think they did some enforcement on.
Okay.
You can kind of get a sense of how they address and look at them as well.
All right. That'd be great. Thank you so much, sir.
Are there any further comments from the board or Jim or Brenda or any of the? No. Okay. All we need now is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Roll call vote. Kevin Davis,
Kevin Davis, yes.
Dan Kane,
Dan Kane, yes.
and Kevin Baker votes yes. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Dave. Thank you.